What's up, y'all? The Pokemon World Championship is coming up this weekend, so I thought it would be a fun idea to highlight some of the Pokemon that have been rising up in the usage stats that have really not been popular the rest of the year, just so that you guys are not caught unawares by any of the Pokemon being featured on the stream. I figured I would feature these sleeper picks for the Pokemon World Championship. So starting out, we have the main sleeper restricted coming into the weekend, Lunala. Lunala has not had any deep top cut runs at any regional or any large regional or international to my knowledge, but it's a Pokemon that has been rising up in usage, particularly among Japanese players. Not how you would maybe expect it to be used, but Calm Mind Moonblast has been very popular. The essential idea here is to use Pokemon like Amoonguss and Rillaboom in combination with leftovers to keep your Lunala at full HP so that you can make use of Shadow Shield, set up Calm Minds, and then basically sweep your opponent's team with both Moonblast and Moongeist, which is, I believe, unresisted coverage against most Pokemon. You're also able to go Terra Fairy to avoid the Calyrex Shadow Rider, which would otherwise be able to deal with you. And generally, the rest of the team is focused on beating problem Pokemon like Calyrex Shadow Rider that can outset up against you. We've also seen a Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam Meteor Beam set. I've seen a little bit of that from Japan as well. But overall, definitely something to be on the lookout. Just a trend that some Japanese players have been getting a little bit creative and using Lunala as their restricted Pokemon. On some of these teams, we actually have seen Maushold being used, but I do think Maushold's main role has been on a really tricky Dondozo team. Actually, this is kind of a cop-out, but all four of these Pokemon have been on the rise coming into the World Championship. On the same composition, a Calyrex Shadow Rider Hyper Offense team with a Dondozo mode. It's really interesting, but going into the Maushold, it is a Friend Guard set, so essentially trying to switch in and allow your either Weezing to do what it's going to do, we'll get to that, or just protect your Calyrex Shadow Rider with the Follow Me as well as Bulk. You can Thunder Wave threats early in the game that could be difficult for the Calyrex Shadow Rider, for example, a Choice Scarf Urshifu, if they don't close combat you essentially. You have usually our Terra Grass to avoid the knockout from close combat and Surging Strikes, which is pretty cool. And then you have Helping Hand to just boost up the Choice Specs Calyrex Shadow Rider or Life Orb sometimes on these teams. It's pretty interesting. You can run Super Fang just to chip things like Incineroar into range for your Astral Barrages later in the game, but oftentimes it is Protect. But yeah, very interesting to see Maushold, which has otherwise had pretty much no usage over the other Follow Me Pokemon in the format, starting to get some usage towards the end of the format. Next we have the Galarian Weezing with the Neutralizing Gas ability. This ability doesn't work on as one, so you're not going to be able to suppress the Calyrex, opposing Calyrex's boost as well as your own. That's pretty cool. You can get an Astral Barrage KO while suppressing your opponent's boost while also getting your own, which is pretty cool. But the main thing of interest on this weezing-galar is actually Poison Gas and Toxic Spikes. So otherwise, you would normally just want to use a Glimmora, which can use Mortal Spin, which is 100% accurate. Poison Gas is only 90% accurate, and it does an accuracy check for both Pokemon, so it is susceptible to misses, but really the focus here is using your Neutralizing Gas to prevent strong abilities from really overpowering your team. And then you have Toxic Spikes to basically, again, just get the Toxic Spikes on the field to set up Poison. Very obvious direction this Weezing is trying to just poison your Pokemon so that the Dondozo can come in and be really, really difficult to deal with. It's a very bulky Dondozo, and you're trying to just really alternate Protect and Leftovers. I haven't seen any with Rest or Substitute, but I could imagine that being on some sets to just really take advantage of the healing and poison. So the general goal of this combination is just for the Weezing to set up the Toxic Spikes and the Poison Gas. The Dondozo will come in and just chip everything down with Protects and then Earthquakes, and then hopefully that will be enough to win the game, with potentially Tatsugiri and Calyrex Shadow Rider in the back, or maybe you've used your Calyrex Shadow Rider early on to just chip things in Dozo, but it's a very devastating combination, not even speaking on the very interesting Tatsugiri set we have in the end here. So after you think you have gotten through the bosses of Weezing, Dondozo, and Calyrex Shadow Rider, you do have the Tatsugiri, which if you're only down to one Pokemon, can actually be pretty difficult to deal with because it has Counter and Mirror Coat. I believe both of them have 32 PP, yeah, so essentially, if you don't have something like a Spore Amoonguss to 1v1 it, you're going to be dealing with the Tatsugiri just going for Counter or Mirror Coat, depending on if you're a physical and special attacker, and it'll pretty much win every 1v1 with Focus Sash in that respect. It's a really cool set. I haven't seen anything like this before, and it does really well in a restricted format where the power level is so high, where everything is essentially just going to be hitting you down to Focus Sash regardless of what restricted it is with any of their attacks outside of maybe Flame Charge Koraidon, but everything else is going to take you do basically 147 HP off of your Tatsugiri, and then just knock itself out. So it's a very interesting set that after you've gotten through the main bosses offensively of the team, you do have to make sure you have preserved enough resources to actually KO the Tatsugiri safely. Next up is Iron Hands, which might not seem like a very interesting Pokemon, but the way it's being used is what's important here. So some of the Iron Hands on Miraidon teams have actually been going for Low Kick to better handle heavy restricted Pokemon, namely Calyrex Ice Rider. Essentially with the Quark Drive and Low Kick, you're actually 2-hit KOing it without needing to opt for a Wild Charge in the electric terrain that would do a lot of damage or close combat. It's a 120 base power on Calyrex Ice Rider, and that's really devastating for their game plans that the Iron Hands can just underspeed the Calyrex in Trick Room and KO it in 2 hits. They don't have enough turns to get the 3-hit KOs that they usually need to on the team, or even the 2-hit KOs when they're getting KO'd in Trick Room before and out of Trick Room by the Miraidon. So it's a very interesting innovation we've been seeing and can really simplify a matchup that would otherwise be a little bit tricky for the Miraidon player. Next up, we have a pretty fringe option, but it has been rising up on a certain Miraidon team piloted by Robbie Shage, the second place finisher at the 2023 World Championship in the senior division. It is this Covert Cloak Venusaur paired with Miraidon. The focus here is definitely the Chlorophyll Sleep Powder, so doubling your speed in the sun and going for Sleep Powder. You can also do pretty well against Kyogre because if they're trying to reset the sun, they're susceptible to a Sleep Powder on a switch-in. You can also hit them with Grass Knot before they've gone for a Terrestrialization, and after they usually are Terra Grass, you can hit them with a Sludge Bomb. And if you force the Terra Grass, the Miraidon can just pick it off later in the game with a Flare Blitz. So a lot of great synergy there, and generally just terrifying in Team Preview because you can't lead Fake Out to beat it. It has the Covert Cloak, and yeah, it also has a Terra Water if you might think that you have it pinned with a Fire-type move or anything like that. You can just commit a Terrestrialization to make sure that you're getting your Sleep Powders and Grass Knots off. And then the combination of Grass Knot and Sludge Bomb is really effective against the Rillabooms and Urshifu in the metagame, doing a lot to the Assault Vest Rillaboom with Sludge Bomb, potentially even poisoning, and then Grass Knot knocking out Urshifu. Now moving to the Volcarona. Volcarona is not that popular, but I have seen it on a bunch of scattered composition used in a lot of different ways. I've seen the supportive Rage Powder set with Rocky Helmet used on a couple of Terrapagos teams just as an alternative Rage Powder Pokemon, and it can be really difficult for Calyrex Ice Rider to answer this. You can Will-O-Wisp them if they are not the Terra Fire one, and even if they are the Terra Fire one, forcing them to Terra Fire makes your Terrapagos' Terra Starstorms super effective into them, which is a cool pin that Incineroar oftentimes goes for, but if for some reason you don't want to use Incineroar on your Terrapagos team, or maybe you want to use both of them, this is something that some Volcarona have been doing. They'll oftentimes run a Terra type of water, or even grass sometimes, but really the focus here is if you get pinned against an Urshifu, not only will they take a Rocky Helmet chip if they go for the Surging Strikes, risk the Flame Body burns, but you can also just minimize the damage, so they're really, really tempted not to go for that early game because the Terra Water is going to be so free. The other set that we have seen a lot of is actually Terra Grass Giga Drain. I've seen this on Joe UX9's Miraidon team. He has been doing pretty well online with a Quiver Dance and Giga Drain set. I don't remember if it's Heat Wave, Flamethrower, or Fiery Dance as the fire type attack, but can definitely set up really quickly. It's a great answer against Zamazenta, which is otherwise occasionally a bit of an issue from Miraidon teams, so you don't have to. You can force the Terrestrialization basically and make it go for the Terra Dragon, then it's weak to Dazzling Gleam or Draco Meteor from your Miraidon, or you can force it into Terra Water, at which point it's very weak to 1 Giga Drain and then to the Volt Switches and Electro Drifts from your Miraidon. So great synergy on that composition. I have seen it on a couple of Calyrex Ice Rider teams. I'm not really sold on it there, but yeah, it's definitely an option as a Zamazenta counter there as well. Next up is Kingambit, and this one is pretty much just exclusive to Joe's team, but he has been doing so well online that I wouldn't be surprised to see other people pick it up. It's a really strong answer to Calyrex Shadow Rider with Kowtow Cleave as a dark type coverage to force it into a Terrestrialization. And if they are sticking to the Terra Fairy that they were earlier in the metagame, you can just hit it hard with Iron Head. If they're Terra Normal, Kowtow Cleave is still doing a ton. Sometimes it will just be Black Glasses to maximize the damage out of your Terra Dark Sucker Punches. You can definitely be taking crazy one-hit KOs, especially if you are Intimidate, Defiant boosted by an Incineroar. And then we can go Lumberry as well, just to handle Amoonguss a little bit better, so you're not forced to switch out or commit a Terra type to that, which I definitely like a lot, as well as not being susceptible to Will-O-Wisp, which Incineroar would otherwise love to do against you. So yeah, not a Pokemon I expect to be incredibly popular, but is on a couple compositions, so I thought it was worth mentioning here. Now, Indeedee is a funny case because I feel like very early on, the Calyrex Shadow Rider Indeedee combination is what everyone jumped to, but people realized that was kind of indexing a little too hard on the Psychic coverage, which you could cover with just literally having an Incineroar on your team, and there's a lot of dark types in the metagame as well, Chien-Pao, so you didn't really want to commit that hard to that. People just shifted to more consistent follow me Pokemon like Amoonguss, except here we are at the end of the metagame with the last Grassroots tournament online being won by an Indeedee Calyrex Shadow Rider balance team. It's definitely rising up a little bit now that Incineroar usage and Chien-Pao usage have kind of been down on the whole, so that is something to watch out for. You can't just build a team that is completely ignoring the Expanding Force option from Indeedee. Usually you can kind of just prepare for it in an hyper offense context, but when you have the balance backing of the traditional Calyrex Shadow Rider cores, it can basically pose a lot of unexpected problems. So interesting to see this Pokemon rising up again. And then Ditto is a Pokemon that's been around, particularly on Justin Burns' Calyrex Ice Rider composition. We saw Safety Goggles 1 do well at North American Internationals on a Kyogre team, but really what we've been seeing has been Focus Sash Ditto, which is really counterintuitive, but in some situations makes sense. So in normal conditions, Choice Scarf or maybe even Quick Claw would be a little bit better, but against things like Calyrex Shadow Rider, Focus Sash does still work. You're not going to be getting the jump on them and knocking them out 100% of the time, but you do have the flexibility to switch moves, and as long as nothing can outspeed and chip you, it's not that big of a risk because you'll still hit the very strong Astral Barrage, ideally boosted once you get that Imposter copy. But what this item does really well is it allows you to handle Calyrex Ice Rider incredibly well in Trick Room. So this Ditto in particular has been very strong in a Koraidon team. The same Koraidon composition with, I believe, Koraidon, Ogerpon, Raging Bolt, Fluttermane, and then one other. It might be Chi-Yu actually. So a very strong Sun team, but it has a lot of weaknesses to Calyrex Ice Rider despite a lot of efforts to beat it. I know a lot of Koraidon players have been working very hard to figure out an answer to Calyrex Ice Rider, and some of them have focused in on Ditto with the Focus Sash, so you can pretty much just let the Calyrex get a knockout, bring in the Ditto, which is able to wall the opposing Calyrex pretty well, copy the boost, and just basically sweep the opposing team if they don't have an Amoonguss remaining. And it's pretty difficult to keep the Amoonguss alive in the first place when you're up against a Flare Blitz Koraidon, and oftentimes Covert Cloak, Taunt, Chi-Yu, which you're more or less forced to lead the Amoonguss to get Trick Room up against because you can't fake out it, so you kind of just have to Rage Powder to make sure you get Trick Room up, and then the Ditto just comes in afterwards once you've taken a KO and just takes advantage of the Trick Room for you. So a bit odd use of a Pokemon that has been around, but worth noting for the World Championship. The last Pokemon I want to go over is Ogerpon. Yes, that is the base Ogerpon form with the Defiant. So the Bullet Seed is essentially meant to just knock out a Focus Sash Urshifu, which has been a set that has been becoming increasingly popular on a Calyrex Shadow Rider composition, really the most popular Japanese one, so it's a cool answer against that. It also has its other benefits. You can go for Terra Grass to get your Embody Aspect speed boost, and then just knock out an Urshifu even if they are a Choice Scarf, if they don't commit to a Terastallization. So there's a lot of cool things this can do in addition to just having Follow Me support, and some of them have run something like Superpower to just knock out Incineroar, and then others have gone Encore to lock things into Fake Out or Protect or anything that you would otherwise not want to be locked into. So really interesting use of this Pokemon that otherwise hasn't been too popular this season, but has been rising up on a couple of compositions, namely Calyrex Ice Rider. There is one team that has been using that a fair bit. Going to keep that under wraps, though, in respect to the players, as well as a Calyrex Shadow Rider team that was able to get, I think, top 16 in the Victory Road, which was public. And that will do it. 12 sleeper picks for the Pokemon World Championship. If you enjoy VGC content, want to see more, please subscribe. Let me know what you're looking forward to seeing at Worlds. And yeah, with all that being said, peace, y'all.